It's preparing YouTube. It's preparing YouTube. Perfect. Preparing YouTube. Perfect.
Welcome, Arizona Costume Institute members, Circles members, museum members, friends and family, to the opening celebration of collective inspiration. Welcome, Arizona Costume Institute members, Circles members, museum members, friends and family. This show brings together objects from across the museum's different collections, from Asian and Latin American to modern and Western. Objects from these different collections are exhibited alongside works from the fashion design collection in pairings that celebrate color, form, technique, and subject matter. Each duet is intended to offer you the opportunity to view and analyze fashion as you would more traditional works of art, such as painting, sculpture, and print. Before I begin, I would like to thank our sponsors, the Arizona Costume Institute, Circles of Support, and museum members. I have invited the museum's curators to join us this evening as we explore the exhibition. They will each share insight into the works that were pulled from the various collections and paired with fashion to provide a deeper understanding of each object's importance and shed light on the connection between these works. From the various collections. I would like to begin first with an elegant duo between the fashion design and Asian art collections. I would like to begin first with an elegant duo between the fashion design and Asian art collections. I would like to begin first with an elegant duo. As you can see in the gallery, we have a beautiful arrangement of objects. We've darkened the walls in order to really call out the beautiful features between these pairings. As you can see in the gallery, we have a beautiful arrangement of objects. American fashion designer Ralph Rucci creates works that are immensely complicated and technically challenging, yet have the appearance of weightlessness and perfect balance. This is perhaps best expressed with his use of the term shadow, the label under which he designed for nearly 20 years. The term shadow references the classical Japanese art of tea making, a ceremonial pursuit that can require dozens of steps to properly prepare and present and consume tea. This attention to precise detail and exacting presentation is evidenced in his garments. Machine and hand stitched over hundreds and sometimes thousands of hours, these garments are outstanding, not only for their amazing detail, such as the perfectly placed stitches, the fine turned hand-worked edges, and even the hand-frayed fringe, but also for the subtle presentation of luxury. It's not ostentatious or grandiose, reserved and deceptively simplistic. The swirls on this jacket are created by crepe wool tubes that are about 3/8 of an inch wide. They've been hand rolled, hand stitched, and then hand applied onto a silk net. This design was inspired by topographical maps. The lines dip and swirl in an organic pattern that gives one the sense of water flowing, or smoke swirling as it envelops the wearer. Similarly,
Helen?
yes.
Helen? I am so sorry. We're having a technical glitch on the back end here. I'm going to pause for 1 second and then I will bring it back up on this slide and we can pick it up from here in 1 second. Thank you for bearing with us. On the back end here. I'm going to pause for 1 second and then I will bring it back up on this slide and we can pick it up. Thank you so much for that pause. We are back up and running. Please continue with the wonderful presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for signing on tonight. As you know, this is a complicated and new technological experience that we are all managing every day, and it's not without glitches. But I assure you, we have a wonderful program in store for you this evening. So this beautiful work by Chado Ralph Rucci, the elegant lines and the swirls on the surface are so beautifully represented similarly in this sculpture by Japanese artist Fujikasa Sotoko, which invokes the elemental forces of nature and gives a sense of swirling energy as the sculpture itself seems to constantly fold and unfold before our eyes. It's static yet alive with energy. Now, I'd like to invite our curator of Asian art, Dr. Janet Baker, to share some insight into this artist's work. Dr. Baker, thank you for joining us this evening.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Helen, for such a brilliant pairing. Both of these objects are colorless, white being the absence of color, which allows the curving and rippling lines to dominate and not be overwhelmed with any color. One is made of tailored fabric, the other of dried clay, both of which are structured forms, yet the sinuous curving lines suggest a freedom and movement within these constraints. I see in this curving movement as representing a feminine spirit. In the human form, the feminine body is composed of curves and spherical shapes, while the masculine body is composed of lines and planes. One of the objects is designed to cover the female body, the other is actually designed by a woman. In a larger macrocosmic view of the world, particularly in Asia, everything that exists is based on a dichotomy of complementary opposites, male and female, solid and void, dry and wet, sun and moon. This is based on ancient Chinese Taoism, but this concept encompasses all forms and energies in both the visible and invisible worlds. In a natural landscape, or in a landscape painting, as we see here, for example, clouds, air, mists, and water are feminine, formless, constantly changing, filled with movement, whereas the rocks, mountains, and trees are masculine, solid, unchanging, and static. The world of fashion design and the world of Japanese ceramics are both ones that were long dominated by men, by constraint, by rigid forms through tailoring or through solid and often rectilinear shapes. In the 20th century, this began to change as women became more educated, entered the world of business, and found their voice to express their identity. Next slide, please. I hope that in the 21st century, this trend will continue to manifest itself in fashion, with clothing that reveals the female form, no longer restricting or covering the natural beauty of all sizes and shapes. And in the expression of art such as ceramics, that women will continue to find new ways of expressing this curvilinear sense of femininity, creative energy, and vitality. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Baker, for those very insightful words. Next, let's take a look at a garment that pulls inspiration from photography. Mary Catranzo is known for creating garments that feature photographic images that have been manipulated using digital technology and then printed or woven onto textiles. Her work is often brightly colored, and the images are fractured, mirrored, and rearranged and reconfigured onto the human form. For her fall 2013 ready-to-wear collection, Catranzo presented garments that featured entire photographic compositions, primarily in values of light gray to black, to create the graphic impact. The designer cites the work of the early 20th century pictorialists as inspiration for this collection, as is evidenced in the misty, dark street scenes and silhouetted barren tree branches that reach across the dress. Her placement of the image on the garment informs the viewer where to look as the eye follows the wet nighttime pavement and pathways disappearing into the distance. The color is applied in two methods on this garment. The lighter gray and silver tone values are woven into the fabric using a jacquard loom, while the darker values are printed onto the surface. By combining these methods, Catranzo is able to create an image that has both crisp, shiny edges and blurred matte edges that speak to the blending of different photographic processes often used by the early pictorialists to similarly achieve areas of high focus and contrast, as well as areas that are more grainy and textured in their focus. I'd like to invite our Norton Family Assistant Curator of Photography, Audrey Sands, to share more information about the different photographers that likely inspired the image featured on this dress and the way that the designer has turned this textile into a living photograph. Audrey, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Helen, and congratulations on such a spectacular show. Indeed, Catranzo's dress calls to mind the work of pictorialist photographers, as the designer cites. In the earliest years of the 20th century, this group of photographers, which included Edward Steichen, Alfred Stieglitz, Robert de Marquis, Clarence White, and Alvin Langdon Coburn, were engaged in a passionate fight to convince the art world of the aesthetic merits of their mechanical medium. They rejected the point-and-shoot approach to photography and embraced labor-intensive, hand-manipulated processes, such as gum-by-chromate printing, which involved hand-coating artist papers with homemade emulsions and pigments, or they made platinum prints, which yielded rich, tonally subtle images. Their photographs emphasized the role of the photographer as craftsman and countered the argument that photography was an entirely automatic, de-skilled medium. This iconic 1904 photograph of the Flatiron Building in Manhattan by Edward Steichen is a prime example of these approaches. His process here layered gum-by-chromate over platinum printing to achieve a moody, blurry, atmospheric, and handmade effect. It's interesting to see Catranzo, a fashion designer 1 century later, engaging in a similar transmedial discourse, imitating photography of the early 20th century with the maintained insistence on blurred textural effects seen here. This photograph by Alfred Stieglitz, one of the most vocal proponents of the pictorialist movement, demonstrates a similar subject matter of the moody and damp autumn New York street, while also featuring the same signature blurred and soft printing effects. The British photographer Alvin Langdon Coburn, too, was a part of this group. His iconic bird's eye view on New York's Madison Square Park, titled The Octopus, seen here, makes of the wheel spoke paths and clock tower shadow an abstraction. Just a few years later, to refute the idea that photography, so tethered to accurate representations of the real world, was antithetical to abstraction, Coburn devised a lens attachment for his camera made up of multiple mirrors through which he photographed various surfaces to produce the results in this picture and others like it. The poet Ezra Pound coined the term vortographs to describe Coburn's experiments, emphasizing its clear ties to the work of British avant-garde vorticist group, a gang of painters and writers formed in London in 1914 with the aim of creating art that expressed the dynamism of the modern world. These artists combined Cubism's fragmentation of reality with hard-edged imagery derived from the machine and the urban environment. Kaleidoscopic abstractions like this are reminiscent of some other photographically derived printed textiles Catranzeau featured in her other collections. Finally, I'd like to close with another photograph from the early 20th century, made by French amateur photographer Jacques-Henri Lartigue. A devotee of the street and loyal documentarian of the upper crust leisure lifestyles of his family and circle of friends, Lartigue's photograph here of the Bois de Boulogne in Paris captures the setting of the urban park, not just as a site for strolling, but as a site for the opulent display of fashion, as a sort of outdoor catwalk. While for so many street photographers of the 20th century, the street was the penultimate space for the sumptuous and conspicuous display of fashion, we see the playful inverse deployed by Catranzeau, where fashion becomes the space for displaying the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. That was fascinating. The images you're seeing here in the gallery, we will have affixed 2 frames near the dress for our guests to observe the photographic images represented on the garment in order to experience for themselves the different compositions that can be created and seen on this single work. Let's turn our attention now to a duo of works that were inspired by the Romanticism of the Wild West. This rugged and untamed landscape has long captured the imagination of artists and designers alike. Often presented with hero-like imagery, the narratives in these works draw from the spirit of manifest destiny and the gluttonous aspirations and wildly destructive and inhumane actions that were whitewashed in order to promote land seizure, relocation practices, and ultimately the decimation of entire cultures in the name of westward expansion. This pairing lays bare the dangerous allegory of seeking greater fortune. Mythic figures such as Buffalo Bill Cody and the Pony Express riders inspired a sense of independence and a rugged survivalist mentality that was popularized on posters, advertisements, and even in theatrical performances. The images presented on this Hermes scarf speak directly to the idealized Western male. Confidently astride his valiant steed, this fictionalized reality presents him as an honorable man, inspiring admiration in the faces of the native peoples observing from a distance. It's a legend that has been propagandized for decades, leading to a cult of Western films, decor, and fashion. This scarf was designed by Kermit Oliver, the only American artist and first Black artist to design for Hermes. This design by Oliver required 37 individual silkscreen runs to achieve the fine detail and perfect alignment of the image depicted. Hermes began producing these scarves in 1937, and to this day, they create a limited run of about 20 different scarf designs each year. Now I'd like to invite our adjunct curator of American art, Betsy Fallman, to discuss the imagery depicted by Western artist James Michaely Guy in his painting titled Cowboys and Indians.
Thank you. Both James Michaely Guy's surrealist painting of battling cowboys and Indians and the Hermes high fashion scarf are pure Western camp, grounded in the Western pulps and spaghetti Westerns. The Pony Express never went through Arizona, although you'll see saguaros on the scarf, though the Hash Knife Pony Express comes 200 miles from Holbrook to Scottsdale every January for the Parada del Sol. Kermit Oliver, who designed the scarf, included a group of Native Americans above the rider who look strikingly like Theodore Roosevelt. Are they poised to attack the unsuspecting Pony Expresser, fashionably dressed in Ralph Lauren's new buckskin line? Or are they a group of Ogallala's Lakotas about to ride down, as they did, the Champs-Élysées at the head of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show about to perform in Paris? Next image. The Pony Express, which was not a financial success, began in the spring of 1860 and lasted only 19 months. At the age of 14, the company liked them young, light, fearless, and perhaps ignorant. The youth who would become Buffalo Bill Cody did 76 hard Wyoming miles from Red Buttes to Three Crossings, changing his horse every 12 miles or so. In his Wild West show, which began in 1883 and continued for 30 years, he recreated a miniature Pony Express run along with the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Here we see the actual Teddy Roosevelt. He's a little too plump to ride for the Pony Express, dressed in his hunting buckskins. He had a ranch in Medora, North Dakota, then Dakota Territory, and he liked to dress the part. While he was famous for his rough riders, he was born too late for the Pony Express. And here I'm showing you a series of Buffalo Bill's shows. I love this one, Wild Rivalries, Savage, Barbarous, and Civilized Races. This newspaper account from 1889 gives a sense of the scale of his spectacles, in this case on their way to the Paris for the Exposition Universelle. Buffalo Bill sailed for Paris yesterday on the steamship Persian Monarch at the head of his Wild West show, with which he expects to surprise and delight all those who attend the French Exposition. His company includes 115 Indians, counting squaws and papooses, this is the 19th century language, 48 cowboys, of whom 16 are musicians, the rest being riders, half a dozen pretty women who can ride and shoot, as many Mexican vaqueros, not to speak of his aides, property men, camp officers, etc. His accompanying menagerie consists of 20 buffaloes, 25 Mustangs, 8 Eskimo dogs, and 186 horses. That is a lot of manure. He had to constantly update his shows to keep them fresh. Horses were central to his performances, and he engaged in international equestrian culture, with costume riders expanding the cowboy culture of the American West to include the Middle East and Russia. Some of the earliest women professional athletes were rodeo stars using the talents they had learned on the ranch. But even earlier, women rode for Buffalo Bill and were paid the same salaries as the men. We see the women entering the arena, not one hair out of place on their horses. My final image is Annie Oakley, the peerless lady wingshot who was a star. She earned more than any other performer in the show except for Buffalo Bill Cody himself. She believed in equality in other ways, asserting, "I would like to see every woman know how to handle guns as naturally as they know how to handle babies." Her marksmanship was legendary. At 30 paces, she could split a playing card held edge on, hit dimes tossed into the air. And now here is an act of marital trust, shot cigarettes from her husband's lips. And when a playing card was thrown in the air, she riddled it with bullets before it touched the ground. Notice her cute outfit, festooned with medals. Both Guy's painting and the Hermes scarf evidence the ongoing fascination the American West continues to have for the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. That was a fascinating gallop through history.
Thank you.
Now let's look at a pairing between the modern art collection and the fashion design collection. One of the most significant periods in 20th century art was the op art movement of the 1960s and 70s. This movement influenced art, film, music, and fashion alike. The impact is still evident today, as can be by British fashion designer Alexander McQueen. Often celebrated for his outrageous and sometimes offensive designs, McQueen's technical acuity and masterful tailoring skills should not be overlooked. This suit, part of the museum's Emphatics archive, is a perfect example of McQueen's extraordinary ability to sculpt with fabric. The entire suit consists of a damier check of about 1/2 inch square that has been cut apart in an almost jigsaw-like pattern and rearranged to create a visual warping and distorting effect similar to the op art work of artist Victor Vasarely. By changing the direction of the fabric, the designer is presented with the challenge of merging together different grain lines and fabric tensions in order to create a perfectly balanced garment that fits and hangs correctly. Now I'd like to invite Assistant Curator Rachel Zebro to discuss the history and impact of the op art movement.
Thank you, Helen. I believe this is my first introduction to ACI, so needless to say, it is a real pleasure to be with you tonight. Next slide, please. I'd like to jump right in with the considerable impact that op art has had on fashion design since the 1960s. On the top left is a checkered black and white painting by Victor Vasarely next to a Tita Rossi dress that was shot by David Bailey and appeared in Vogue Italy in 1969. The photograph below is of the Pierre Cardin collection, also from 1969, and was inspired by the work of Bridget Riley, another prominent op artist whose work is illustrated on the right. As we can see from these two examples, op art has a visually arresting appearance. Its timing could not have been better, as the reduced geometric forms and repetitive networks of lines create illusory effects and intense vibrations that really captured the perceptual shock and, dare I say, psychedelic nature of the 1960s aesthetic. The op art movement quickly gained recognition in 1965 after an exhibition opened at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City called The Responsive Eye. Its roots are steeped in several 20th century avant-garde traditions, such as the Bauhaus and the experimental compositions of Moholy-Nagy on the left, and constructivism, in which an example on the right illustrates Vasarely's homage to Kazimir Malevich, a leading artist in the constructivist movement who revolutionized non-objective painting by using the black square as a basic unit of artistic expression. In his work, Vasarely begins with the square as a schema and subdivides it into various planes according to different values and rhythms, which might also remind you of another Bauhaus artist, Joseph Elbers, in his series Homage to the Square. Here, the flat blocks of color are arranged in space and play on the way color works with our perception, based on their coolness and warmth, where white emerges toward us and black recedes into space. Like the artists who came before him, Vasarely's aesthetic integrates art with industry. In this example from our collection, he uses the essential geometric forms to reflect the underlying structures or the foundations of architecture, space, and urban planning. Titled Folklore from 1963, Vasarely maps out various forms and colors onto a grid, much like the work of Piet Mondrian, to capture the movement, speed, and complexity of a modern and technologically advanced society. In translating this real space onto a picture plane, Vasarely connects us to the physics of the earth and creates an art form that relates to both humans and nature. Vasarely once said that he prefers the hallucinating plays of two opposing colors, white and black, as seen here in Supernova from 1959 to 1961. The title references the universe and the cosmos, again alluding to the natural world and possibly another dimension. Here, a series of linear networks and patterns intersect with circular and square forms to suggest the projecting and pulsating movements of elements throughout time and space. It is through these spatial illusions, trickeries of the eye, and optical effects that Vasarely catches our attention and engages us through the act of looking, where we become active agents in the creation of the work, and each experience that we have deepens the meaning. Vasarely's most iconic visual effect is achieved when he replaces his black and white color palette with a more vibrant chromatic range. This generates further impressions of movement and vibration throughout the surface, like Sabina, who depicts the illusion of three-dimensional shapes escaping their two-dimensional picture plane with sort of a Baroque swelling. Vasarely designed and perfected this aesthetic what he called plastic unities on a grid-based system so that these works could be recreated using industrial printing techniques of the modern era, rendered on any scale and used in almost any design context. Most notably, this is seen in reproductive prints, shop windows, theater settings, and certainly on the runway in the world of fashion design.
Thank you, Rachel, for that insight into this very important movement in art. When you visit the gallery, I invite you to sit in the window seat, where you can view and enjoy a duo of works featuring still life arrangements pulled from both the European collection and the fashion design collection. Still life paintings developed in the 16th century and reached their artistic height in the 17th century during the Dutch Golden Age of masters. Often filled with artifacts from art, science, music, and the natural world, these arrangements were intended to remind us of the impermanence of life and the fleeting nature of our worldly pursuits. Our vanities become our undoing. These memento moris, or reminders of death, should encourage us to appreciate life, to embrace the here and now, and to live life as fully as we can in the face of certain death. This is a message that feels particularly on point in our current global crisis. This painting by Jean Van Dalen II is paired with a dress by Ray Kawakubo of Comme des Garçons from her Spring-Summer 2018 collection. The bodice of the dress is printed with a portrait of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II of Habsburg, reimagined as Vertumnus, the Roman god of vegetation and transformation. The artist Giuseppe Arcimboldo specialized in imaginative portraits made from objects such as fruit, vegetables, and flowers. The skirt features the work of German-Dutch still life painter Abraham Mignon, whose work is often filled with flowers, fruit, and game. The full garment is actually composed of two separate dresses. They've been connected at the side waist and the shoulders, one applied onto the other. The sleeves feature large turned back cuffs, which is a device that was popularized in fashion during the 16th century, when oversized sleeve cuffs, collars, lapels, and the boot tops were fashionable because it was an opportunity to show off other luxurious textiles such as silks, leathers, and lace. By layering the dresses in this manner, the designer has established the garment as a painterly canvas, creating a dramatic presentation that brings the two-dimensional to life. Now we'll take a look at our American collection, where we see a vase by Louis Comfort Tiffany set alongside a jacket and dress by designer Mariano Fortuny. These artists were both enthralled by color and light. Each of the artists developed specific methods, chemical processes, and even invented devices to create works that glimmered with the iridescence of the natural world. Fortuny was known to dip white fabrics into multiple dye baths, sometimes over a dozen different colors, in order to achieve the richly colored silk velvets that changed as the wearer moved, causing light to reflect off the fibers in different ways. Tiffany also harnessed the reflective property of light, creating glass works that seem to shimmer from one tone to another as you view from various angles. The vase seen here is made of Fauvril glass, a trademarked process created by Tiffany, whereby different minerals and materials were applied during the molten stage, rather than applying it onto the surface. In addition to creating his own dyes, fashion designer Fortuny developed a pleating technique for silk fabric that resulted in the exceptionally fine pleats seen here. A method that was patented, yet has never been successfully recreated in its original form by other designers. His work, especially the pleating, has inspired fashion designers such as Mary McFadden, Adolfo, and possibly even the micro pleating favored by Japanese designer Issey Miyake. Now we'll look at a pairing from our Latin American collection. This duet features the oldest objects in the fashion design collection, which is a pair of men's leather gloves from circa 1640, which are adorned with metallic lace and metal sequins, set alongside the portrait of a young woman dating from circa 1760, a little over 100 years later. I chose this pairing because both works celebrate the fine craft of lace making, which is iconic in both of the periods. Lace making began in the 16th century in two different forms. There's bobbin lace, which is composed of multiple threads, and needle lace, which is one continuous thread. Lace was and still is one of the most laborious, time-consuming, and highly technical crafts in fashion. Of course, we now have machine-made lace, but traditionally, lace makers would practice for many years in order to master the delicate detail and perfect precision necessary to render these miniature works of art. Often, entire families would work as lace makers, passing this knowledge down through the generations. These gloves are adorned with a very special form of lace, made entirely of drawn wire and metallic sequins. Drawing wire means pulling it through a series of small holes or dies, and this process was perfected during the period and offered lace makers a new material from which to make their craft. Wearing metallic lace like this signified extreme wealth because wire was considered real currency and oftentimes would be melted down or drizzled to reclaim the material. These gloves are in nearly perfect condition, and with their lace intact are very rare, exceptional highlights from the museum's fashion design collection. Hanging next to the gloves in the gallery is a portrait of a young woman from the 18th century, which features lace engagements, which are removable sleeves that were very popular during that period. We see that the artist has rendered this lace in nearly perfect detail, calling out every loop and knot in order to accurately represent the fine lacework. The artist could have easily indicated this through much bolder, looser strokes, but chose instead to render it in nearly perfect detail, which signifies the importance that lace held during this period. Our Selig Family Foundation Curator of Modern Art, Gilbert Vicario, has graciously recorded some comments to share with us this evening. We are very lucky to hear from him.
Across all of Pam's collections. Tonight, I will speak a little about a wonderful colonial Latin American painting titled Portrait of Doña María Moreno y Buenaventura, circa 1760. Viceregal portraiture in Mexico was essentially concerned with the kind of power that defined colonial politics, society, and religion. The first portrait commissions in New Spain focused on the highest ranking church and royal officials, thereby extending the reach of the patron's presence. As wealth increased in Mexico, in silver mining, for example, so did the demand for upper-class families to commission portraits. The second decade of the 18th century brought about the emergence of several genres of art in New Spain, including the casta painting genre, a non-scientific visual system of classification of the changing racial makeup of Mexico. The second genre that emerged was the so-called monjas coronadas, or crowned nuns, in which young women from wealthy families were commemorated in portraits that celebrated their entry into cloistered life. The third genre that developed, and to which portrait of Doña María Moreno y Buenaventura belongs to, is that of the society portrait. As wealth and populations grew in Mexico, so did the demand for this type of portraiture from families that belonged to the elite criollo class and to Spanish nobility. Within this last category, we saw a rapid rise in the number of female portrait commissions, as well as those of children. Emulating fashionable European styles of portraiture, the noble women were depicted dressed in finery that might include diaphanous veils, lace and pearls, gold buttons, and gemstones of every color of the rainbow. The origin of the materials of the dress might have included Asian silk, Flemish or French lace, and Caribbean pearls. Of particular fascination to me are the exaggerated beauty marks, often made of velvet or leather, which frequently appeared on the sitter's face. You will notice that Doña Maria has a large black mole just above her right eyebrow. another way of delineating class privilege and perhaps hiding imperfections of the skin. I hope you enjoy the rest of this evening's program, and I hope everyone can make it to the museum to see this fabulous exhibition. Once again, thank you so much, Helen, for inviting me to participate in this program, and congratulations on a wonderful exhibition. Helen, thank you so much.
I hope that you all are able to visit the museum soon and view this exhibition and the many other beautiful works we have in the galleries. The objects in this gallery are spaced to afford you the opportunity to view the pairings while also being comfortably distanced from other patrons. Please consider becoming a member of the museum and joining the Arizona Costume Institute in order to participate in more events such as this. Your support is valuable in our efforts to preserve and exhibit these works. Thank you to my fellow curators for joining us this evening and sharing your insight with us all. To close out our program, I'd like to invite Arizona Costume Institute President Kathy May to speak a bit about the organization and the many ways that they support the fashion design collection and Phoenix Art Museum at large.
Thank you, Helen. As president of the ACI board, I would like to personally thank you for supporting the Arizona Costume Institute with your attendance tonight. Since 1966, ACI has been dedicated to its mission statement to promote the appreciation and understanding of fashion design through the acquisition and preservation of works of historical and aesthetic significance, educational programs, and exhibition support for Phoenix Art Museum's Fashion Design Department. Please go to the ACI website now to RSVP the February 11, 2021 Jeffrey Bean exclusive virtual event. This is our annual fundraiser, and we would appreciate your generous contribution to attend and support ACI.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you at the museum. Please stay safe and have a happy holiday. Good night.